Hi everyone, this is Intermediate Music Theory, lesson number 8. We're going to continue our conversation about intervals, and we're going to talk about interval inversion today. So whenever we kind of flip interval around and we move the bottom note and we move it to the top an octave higher, we're going to end up with what's called an inversion. So we're going to use the musictheory.net lesson on interval inversions. And I just want to mention that, as you can see here, I skipped writing intervals. That's because I covered this topic of this lesson in the exercise video last week. So writing intervals is all about the three-step process of how to make specific intervals, which is the first step is to come up with a generic interval. Second step is to count the number of half steps. And then third step is to add accidentals to make it work. So because I went through it pretty in a lot of detail in the exercise, I'm just going to skip it because it's going to be kind of a lot of the same stuff that we already talked about. So, but if you want to go through it again as a reminder, as a review, you should go ahead and do that at home. But I'm going to go over to interval inversion because this is new. All right, so let's click on this lesson. So when we talk about an inversion, we're talking about, in terms of music, we're talking about moving the lowest note in a group an octave higher. Inversion works for interval, group of two notes, and it can also work for a chord, which is actually the first lesson of the advanced music theory, which is actually the next lesson after this. So chords also have inversions, but the first time that we see inversions is groups of two notes, which are intervals. So we're going to basically, to make an inversion, we're going to take the bottom note and we're going to go up one octave from there. So we're going to be inverting some intervals. Let's go to our first example. So in our first example, we have a perfect fifth, C natural to G natural, right? And the 7 half steps, if you take a look over here on the right. All right, let's take a listen to what that sounds like. Cool. So in order to invert the interval, we're going to do is we're going to take that lower C, and we're going to move it up a whole octave above. So we're going to end up with a C an octave higher. All right, so the result is a perfect fourth. As you can see, this is no longer a fifth because we have a generic interval of a fourth, 1, 2, 3, 4. But we also have 5 half steps, which is a perfect fourth. So this is not going to be an augmented or diminished fourth, a perfect fourth. An augmented fourth would have been 6 half steps, and a diminished fourth would have been 4 half steps. So let's listen to the perfect fourth to hear what it sounds like. All right. So let's invert a perfect fourth now. So we're going to start with F sharp to B natural, and let's listen to that. All right, and just take a look over here on the right. That's 5 half steps. So that's the perfect fourth. And let's now move that F sharp an octave higher. I'm going to end up with this interval here, which is a perfect fifth. Let's make sure that we have that this is right. Let's make sure that we first have the generic interval of a fifth, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have a fifth, and then is it perfect? Well, let's see. From B natural to F sharp, we have 7 half steps. So that is a perfect fifth. If you remember the previous example, we had a perfect fourth, which was 5. 6 half steps would have been an augmented fourth, and then the next interval is a perfect fifth. An augmented fourth, if you had written this higher, could have also been a diminished fifth. The perfect fifth would have been 7, and 6 half steps would have been a diminished fifth. So this is a perfect fifth. And let's listen. Cool. So we have pretty interesting idea here, which is that a perfect interval is always going to invert to another perfect interval. And as you saw in the previous example, the fourth and the fifth always invert to each other. So if you start from a perfect fourth, you're always going to end up with a perfect fifth in the inversion, and the other way around. If you start with a perfect fifth, when you invert it, you're going to end up with a perfect fourth. That's always going to be the case no matter how you look at it. Specifically though with perfect fourths and fifths. So just be mindful of that. All right, so let's invert major intervals now. So we have a major third, it's C natural to E natural. A major third is 4 half steps. So we're gonna invert this by moving that bottom C to the next octave up. And we are going to end up with a minor sixth. And let's just be sure. So first of all, generic interval is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's sixth generic interval. And the number of half steps is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. A minor sixth has 8 half steps. Remember that the perfect fifth had 7, and the next step is a minor sixth. If you remember the perfect fifth, if you go up a half step from a perfect fifth, you could also have an augmented fifth, but this isn't an augmented fifth because the generic interval is a sixth. Now, if this had been written as B sharp, we would have an augmented fifth. But it's not that because we have it written as a C natural on the staff. So 8 half steps is a minor sixth. All right, so a major third inverts to a minor sixth. Let's invert a minor third now. So E natural to G natural. Oh, and we didn't listen to that interval before. I want to listen because this helps our understanding of the ear training part, which, by the way, we're going to practice this week in the exercises. We're going to practice the ear training portion of this. So, from C to E is a major third. And the minor sixth, it sounds like this. Cool. So let's start from the minor third now. Let's E natural to G natural. And let's listen. So a minor third is 3 half steps. Remember that the major third was 4 half steps, and the minor third is a half step less than major. So it's 3 half steps. So if we now take that E at the bottom and bring it to the next octave, we're gonna end up with a major sixth. Remember that the minor sixth before was 8 half steps. So 1 more half step makes a major interval, and that's gonna be a major sixth. And let's listen to the major sixth now. Let's listen to the minor third, and let's listen to them back to back now. All right, so another rule, minor and major intervals always invert to each other. So in other words, if you start from a minor interval, the inversion is always going to be a major interval. And if you start from a major interval, the inversion is always going to be a minor interval. All right? And the other rule is that a third always inverts to a sixth, and a sixth always inverts to a third. So keep that in mind. Let's do major seventh now. So C to B natural. A major seventh is 11 half steps. It's 1 half step less than a perfect octave. So a major seventh is 11 half steps. And we're going to take that C up an octave. And the result is a minor second because it's only 1 half step up. A minor second is the same thing as a half step. Now, just as you can see here, the rule still applies. A major interval inverted into a minor interval. Okay, so let's listen back. That's the major seventh. That's the minor second. All right, so that is another rule. Second and seventh intervals always invert to each other. And finally, let's talk about diminished and augmented intervals. So a diminished and augmented interval always invert to each other. So if you start from a diminished interval, the inversion is an augmented interval, and vice versa. The other way around also works. So let's make an example so you see how that works. We're going to invert this augmented fourth, which is C natural F sharp. And as you can see, it is augmented because of that F sharp makes it 6 half steps. A perfect fourth would have been 5 half steps from C to F natural, but one more half step from a perfect fourth makes an augmented fourth. So that's six half steps. Now, if we move that C up an octave, we're gonna end up with C sharp, B sharp, what am I saying? F sharp, C natural. And that, as you can see, is also six half steps, but this is a diminished fifth and not an augmented fourth, even though it's the same number of half steps. And that's because, remember that how we write it on the staff counts. The generic interval in this case is a fifth because we went from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've gone up 5 lines and spaces. In the previous example, we went from 1 letter line, so 2, second, third, and fourth. Okay? So very important to note that because of the way it's written on the staff, this is a diminished fifth and not augmented fourth in this case. So also want to point out that a perfect fifth was 7 half steps. We remember that from the previous example. And if you take a perfect interval and you bring it down a half step, you end up with a diminished interval. So in that case, 7 half steps was a perfect fifth, and 1 less half step, or 6 half steps, would be a diminished fifth. And let's listen back and forth now to the augmented fourth and the perfect fifth. And if you notice, this interval sounds very similar. In fact, it's exactly the same sonically speaking. In terms of sound, it's exactly the same interval. And the reason why that is because they're both 6 half steps. So the exact distance, the exact number of half steps is the same. So nothing changes there. So just keep that in mind. It's the same sound. In terms of sound, this interval was called the tritone. The tritone is just that sound of 6 half steps, without taking into consideration whether it's augmented fourth or diminished fifth. The augmented fourth, diminished fifth takes into account how it's written on the staff, but the name tritone is simply that interval sound that is 6 half steps. And another interesting thing about it is that it splits the octave exactly in half. As you can see here, this arrow is C natural, and this arrow is the next C natural on the keyboard. And this key right here is the exact halfway point between the two C's. And you know that that's true because this was 6 half steps, and this was another 6 half steps. So that's another interesting thing about the tritone, that it divides a perfect octave exactly in half. All right, we're gonna practice that in the ear training so that you guys see how that works and also what this sounds like. So take a look at this chart here so that you remember how different combinations of minor and major, perfect to perfect, diminished to augmented, they invert to one another. And also these combinations, second and seventh, invert to one another. Third and sixth, invert to one another. And fourth and fifth, invert to one another. Okay, I hope that was helpful and pretty clear. This is going to be really useful, especially when you get to chords, which, by the way, this is the first lesson of the next group of lessons in the advanced music theory. Is actually the first lesson in the advanced music theory. So this lesson is going to be the last level of intermediate music theory. So now that you're finished here, you can pick up with the beginning of advanced music theory, and that's going to pick up exactly where this ended. All right, guys, this is it for now. You guys have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.